In just 10 minutes, get the key insights from Jordan B. Peterson's explosive podcast with Matt Goodwin, aired on February 14th, 2025. From political corruption and mass migration to the grooming gang scandal and the rise of Reform UK, this summary distills 90 minutes of hard-hitting conversation into the essentials. Stay till the end for the full picture. Here are the key takeaways from the podcast. Takeaway 1. The rot in British politics. For years, the UK has been controlled by an elite class that imposes policies without facing their consequences. Both Labour and the Conservatives have become almost identical, leaving voters without real alternatives. These politicians push mass migration, green energy policies, and social justice ideas, even when they cause economic and social problems. The working class majority, especially outside London, feels ignored and betrayed. The Conservative Party has abandoned traditional values and become a liberal party, while Labour is more focused on identity politics than actual working class concerns. For example, Boris Johnson promised to cut immigration, but instead allowed record numbers of migrants, worsening housing and public service shortages. Do you think Labour and the Conservatives are really the same today? Let me know in the comments. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 2. The ERP gang scandal and political cowardice. The grooming gang scandal, where mostly Pakistani Muslim gangs abuse thousands of young girls, is one of Britain's worst crimes. Despite overwhelming evidence, authorities ignored the problem for years. Victims were mainly white, working-class girls, often from broken homes, and were drugged and sexually exploited. Authorities feared being called racist, so they looked the other way. Even today, the government refuses to launch a national inquiry, showing that political correctness still dominates decision-making. Some families who tried to rescue their daughters were arrested, while the criminals walked free. For example, in Rotherham, at least 1,400 girls were abused over 16 years, but local officials did nothing out of fear of offending communities. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 3, the fall of British universities. British universities, once places of free thinking and debate, are now controlled by radical ideologies. Instead of encouraging open discussion, they punish those who challenge progressive ideas. Many academics are afraid to speak their minds, knowing they could lose their jobs or funding. Research funding is often tied to diversity and social justice projects rather than academic excellence. Universities focus more on activism than genuine education, discouraging independent thought. Bureaucracy has grown, making research more difficult and costly. For example, Matt Goodwin, once a respected academic, lost funding and faced harassment after publicly supporting Brexit and questioning progressive policies. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 4, mass migration and the population trap. The UK's population growth is now entirely driven by immigration, while birth rates among native Brits have dropped below replacement levels. Public services, including healthcare and housing, are under extreme pressure due to rapid population increases. Many migrants come from cultures that do not integrate well, leading to social tensions. The economy is not growing fast enough to support the rising number of people. Politicians claim mass migration is necessary, but they ignore the long-term consequences. For example, in many British cities, people struggle to get housing or see a GP, while new arrivals receive government-funded support. Should the UK reduce migration, or is it necessary for economic growth? Share your thoughts. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 5, the rise of the luxury belief class. The modern elite no longer gains status through wealth, but through having the right opinions. These luxury beliefs make them feel morally superior while hurting ordinary people. Rich politicians and activists support open borders but live in gated communities. They push environmental policies that make energy expensive, yet they can afford the higher costs. They promote defunding the police while living in safe neighborhoods with private security. For example, celebrities and politicians often lecture the public about climate change while flying on private jets. Their moral superiority disappears when it affects their own comfort. We're halfway through the video. Thank you for sticking with us this far. If you're enjoying it, please give us a thumbs up and share it in your WhatsApp groups. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to comment below. To see more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Now let's continue with the video. Takeaway 6. Media and information control. The UK's mainstream media does not act as a watchdog for the people. Instead, it protects the political elite and suppresses inconvenient truths. Journalists ignored the grooming gang crisis for decades and only covered it when they had no choice. The media brands anyone who questions progressive policies as far-right to shut down debate. Social media companies censor those who challenge the mainstream narrative. Independent voices like Elon Musk and alternative media are now filling the gap left by traditional outlets. For example, a recent mass protest in London over working-class concerns was barely covered by mainstream media, while smaller, woke protests received major attention. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 7. Net zero policies. Economic disaster disguised as climate activism. The UK's net zero policies have caused skyrocketing energy prices, job losses, and industrial decline, while making little real impact on global emissions. High energy costs are making life harder for businesses and families. The UK is shutting down steel factories, leaving thousands unemployed, while China continues expanding its coal industry. Green policies are implemented without considering their effects on the economy or working-class people. For example, British steelworkers are losing their jobs due to net zero regulations, while China builds a new coal plant every month. The economic burden falls on ordinary Brits, not the elites who promote these policies. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 8. Reform UK. A political realignment? As Labour and the Conservatives lose public trust, Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, is gaining ground as a serious alternative. Unlike traditional parties, Reform UK opposes mass migration, net zero, and political correctness. It prioritizes free speech, national identity, and economic growth. Many disillusioned voters see it as the only party that represents their real concerns. Polls show Reform UK rising rapidly, with a real chance of reshaping British politics. For example, in recent surveys, Reform UK has overtaken both Labour and the Conservatives, signaling a potential political shift similar to Brexit. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 9. The need for a cultural revival. The decline of Britain is not just political, it is also cultural. A strong society needs shared values, identity, and purpose. Patriotism and national pride have been made to seem offensive. The breakdown of family structures has weakened communities. Britain's history and traditions are being erased or rewritten to fit progressive narratives. A country without a strong cultural foundation cannot survive in the long term. For example, in Israel, a strong pro-family culture and national identity have helped maintain social stability. Britain, by contrast, is losing its sense of self. Now let's move to the last takeaway. Takeaway 10. The future depends on the people, not the elite. Real change will not come from politicians, it must come from the people. The public must demand better policies and refuse to accept the lies of the elite. Brexit proved that ordinary people can challenge the political class and win. Reform UK and similar movements show that people want a real alternative. The media and government will resist change, but the public has the power to push back. The future of Britain depends on whether its people take action. For example, when enough public pressure was put on politicians over Brexit, they had no choice but to follow through. This shows that real change is possible. Do you think Reform UK can bring real change, or will the system block them? Let's discuss. Here is a brief introduction about Matt Goodwin. Matt Goodwin is a disillusioned university professor who stepped away from a tenured position last year to get more involved in politics and the public debate. He has the largest Substack in the UK, presents the TV show State of the Nation on GB News, is the author of 6 books, including 2 national bestsellers, and has many followers on social media in the UK and across Europe. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this summary of the Jordan B. Peterson podcast with Matt Goodwin informative. If you're interested in learning more about these topics, I encourage you to watch the full podcast on YouTube. If you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a like below and share this video in your WhatsApp groups. You can also discuss about this video by commenting below. To get more such videos in your timeline, Press the subscribe button below.